I'm Janine. This is KUCI 88.9 FM in Irvine, and this is Get the Funk Out. Joining me today is Grant Hier. Welcome.
Well, thank you. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
We met at a Poets and Writers event, probably the last one there was at the very beginning of the year, sadly. That was a wonderful event, and I have your book right here.
Oh, thank you. I have your book right here.
Oh,
I enjoyed it. Yeah, that was at a Poets and Writers Roundtable at the
museum.
At the museum, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it was the last event that before the isolation happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it was a pleasure meeting you, and I'm glad we're doing this. Thanks for the invite.
I have a question before we get into your current work. At what age, what point in your life did you turn to poetry, or have you always been a writer?
That's a good question. I've always been a writer, I would say, if those are the choices. I think, it's just something I've always done. And when people ask me, where do you find the time to write? When I try and figure that out, I think, well, I don't think that's the right question. I think that question misses what it is to be a writer, for me at least. I know every writer is different, but it's just the way I process the world. So
yes,
it's something I've always, my parents tell me I was reading by the time I was 3. I had an older sister who was teaching me, and I was one of those kids who read the dictionary and looked up etymologies and was sounding out words. Just always, my grandparents and parents were telling stories and reading to us, and I was fascinated by the world. And I wrote, it was just, I think art is, in general, all the arts are a way of, again, I'm going to qualify it. It's a different process for every artist, but for me, it's a way of understanding the world better. So it's just a way of breathing. It's just a way of taking in the information or hearing a phrase or thinking about something and doing that on that canvas instead of all internally.
Yes.
And then seeing, I understand, it's like circling the flame of truth, that my paintings will do it, or my music will do it, or my poems, or something will get me closer to that reality, that truth, the emotional truth that I seek most times in my poetry and understanding. And so it's not that I turned to writing. I think I've always just done it because I've always been in love with words.
Yes.
And I see it as a way of seeing the world. It's not a switch I turn on or off and say, suddenly I'm going to be a poet now.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I have been driven to write, where I all of a sudden have this moment where it's like exercising. I have to go be alone and throw myself in front of a notebook, and off I go, because my book was written in a notebook wherever I went, on a plane, in a library. And just the act of creating characters or words, and it's an amazing way to process things, but also to, I don't know, I felt like I go to somewhere else, and I feel better after that few hours of writing.
Yep. And if I don't, for any extended period of time, I'm not centered.
Right.
It's just something that I always turn to and do it.
Yes.
It's interesting. When I was, I just finished the book. The manuscript I'm working on now is, it's called Lyre, 394 Poems in 365 Days. And I wrote a poem a day as part of an April 30 for 30 challenge that the poet Lorraine Delaney Ullman, I've been in a writing group with her for years, decades, and we're in a poetry reading group, and she just threw out an invitation saying, do you want to write 30 poems in 30 days for National Poetry Month? Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I don't have the time. And as soon as those words left my lips, I went, really? You write every day anyway.
Yeah.
So why not try and finish a poem? And then I thought, well, then it's forcing it, and I don't know. But I love the community I love seeing my other poets' words, and I thought, I'm going to regret it if I don't. Yes. Was my first. So I said, yeah. And so I did 30. And at the end of April and May, I went, anybody from May? And nobody did. And so I just did it myself. And then June, I threw out the invite again, and 2 other poets joined. And so I just, every month I went, and it was like exercising. It's exactly what you mentioned.
Yeah.
I felt my chops getting better, like building muscles. And, you know, I'm old and I've been writing a while, but so to feel myself grow,
Yes.
was really eye-opening for me. And so,
and uplifting.
oh, totally. It was like a high. I swear to you,
It
Janine,
is a high.
I was thinking, this is like I'm on some kind of drug that's turned my eyesight and ears to better, you know, like I turned the sensitivity up, and I was noticing things during the day. Just because because it kept me in process.
Yes.
And so I became just a better writer and a more alive and awake in the world. And
don't you feel that when you have a deadline, you make your own deadline, that you feel so much better. You meet that deadline, you use your time productively. I don't imagine you're binging Netflix. You're not that kind of person.
Well, I do. I have. I don't write a poem a day anymore. I stopped at the end of 365 days, the month before. I was approaching that, you know, that milestone, and I thought, what am I going to do? You know,
going to binge Netflix.
Yeah. I mean, I really was torn. I wanted to keep going and be that better writer. I mean, if the struggle is to find time to write for writers, and if I'm doing it and I'm feeling better, then I'd be a fool to stop. And yet I stopped yoga, even though I know it makes me feel better. And we do all these things, but but right beforehand, the city of Anaheim said, you're going to be the next Poet Laureate. And I went, okay, so I don't know what that commitment's going to be. I'm going to put that project down. I can always return and start it later. And so that's what I did after I finished. And as soon as I told my publisher that I'd written 394 poems, and he said, that's a book.
Sure.
And it's all written. It's going to be easy.
Sure.
So we thought, because then I realized, you know, the teacher in me, I'm also an educator, and I thought, it's a missed opportunity if I don't talk about the experience and the tricks. I invented new ways to write poems that I'd never considered before, just because of that deadline. You know, the midnight would come. I'd be tired. I'd be a day of teaching creative writing and about to start my drive home, and the midnight deadline was there, and I knew I wouldn't have time to compose it my traditional ways. And so I'd pick up my phone, turn on the memo, and dictate a poem. And then I became proficient at dictating poems
It's great.
Only because of that deadline. I had a journalism scholarship out of high school.
Wow.
And deadlines to me I always work better under a deadline, you know. But I do think it's true that a job will expand or contract according to the time you have for it. So if you have, 8 weeks to build a fence before the relatives come or whatever, it'll take you 8 weeks to do it, as a rule. I mean, just generally.
Unless you don't like them and you tell them it's going to take 16, sorry.
Yeah. Fill the house with uncomfortable furniture.
Yes. What was it like when you found out you were going to be Poet Laureate?
I wasn't sure what it involved. I mean, it was a high honor.
What does it involve?
Well, it's the title is the Poet Laureate for the City of Anaheim and the Literary Ambassador. And traditionally, the Poet Laureate got a butt of sack, which is, when I say that, when I visited schools, the kids all laugh, especially the younger ones.
Yes.
But that's basically 126 gallons in a wooden cask that they called a butt, I guess. And the sack was sherry or some kind of alcohol. It's in Shakespeare quotes it, I think, in The Tempest.
Okay.
Stefano wrote in on a butt of sack or something.
Butt of sack.
So I always like that. It was not a paid gig, although some poets laureate get some kind of stipend to run programs. I was the first, so I was kind of setting it up. There was nothing before me. And so, because I'm an educator, I focused my efforts on visiting schools and the underrepresented communities and giving
Hmm.
away books and class and setting up readings and workshops.
That's
I set up
great.
workshops for refugees where they're writing in their own language about their experience. Um, and so it was just to spread the love of literature and to hold events. And I, 1 year into it, I asked the Culture and Heritage Commission to meet with them. And I told them I would not, it was a 2-year appointment. And I said, well, I'm not going to apply again. So I had plenty of time, but let's get some diversity in here.
Yes.
Let's get people who are more representative of our community,
Good.
rather than the old white guy who's in all the books, you know, or who, you know, metaphorically, I'm not in all the books, but
Right.
um, the city is diverse, and the more that people can see, the more I could share the mic.
Good.
I mean, I didn't want to. I probably could have stayed in had I applied again, or I would have had a good shot at it at least. But no, I mean, my whole strategy for holding events was to share the mic, is
Yes.
to hold an event and then let the people speak in their own voice.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So growing up, I was a little challenged with poetry. I think I remember something called, is it Ionic Pentameter?
Iambic pentameter.
Okay. These are
That's it.
things like would intimidate me. Could you give me a general idea of where people can start with poetry if they're not familiar?
Yeah, that absolutely, and that was one of the challenges of reaching out to the community for people who have never gotten into poetry and don't think they like it because it's because most of the poetry they've been exposed to, at least in school traditionally, I'm painting with a very broad brush, so forgive me. But the tendency in education has been to turn to the old poems that either are really sing-songy,
Yes.
or Shakespeare, and it's not in a language that the modern ear is used to. And so if you're only exposed for a short period of time to it, you don't get into the natural rhythms and hear the beauty of the language and the music that Shakespeare had, and he did. So iambic pentameter, Shakespeare wrote most of his plays in, and it's simply put, an iamb is a foot. We can break syllables up into metrical feet. So an unstressed followed by a stressed da-dum, da-dum is an iamb. And if you have
Oh,
5 of those in a line, it's da-dum, 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 da-dum,
oh,
da-dum, da-dum. So iambic 5, a penta 5, and iambs 5 iamb. So Shakespeare, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alterations finds, or bends with the remover to remove. So I'm saying it the way the human speech says it, and in English, an I am is the most common. It's like a heartbeat.
right.
And so I could say, when I have fears that I may cease to be, da 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 da. Or I could just say, when I have fears that I may cease to be. You know, it's the way that it's delivered. So that's what it is. Iambic pentameter. It's a way of controlling the meter of a poetic line.
It also reminds me of, let's say, rap music,
For
or
sure.
you know, like if you think of Hamilton or any kind of rap music, like you dissect what they're doing. It's so fascinating how it's to me. I was watching Hamilton the other night. It's brilliant.
It is. It really
It's
is.
mind-blowing brilliant. And I'm
Yeah.
sure from a poetry perspective, yeah.
It's beautiful and so great to hear that and to see it be so popular. But you know, music is the close sister of poetry.
Yes.
The troubadours were doing verse and storytelling and narratives and using all those techniques. And as they come through a town, they use repetition so that the ears could remember it the next
Excuse me,
time
like for
around.
instance, like are you thinking of like Buddy Guy and blues and
For sure, that's a straight formula. Blues is a
yeah,
formula, and so it's all musical. And if you look at the terms, you know, there's beat and rhythm and breath and song and pitch and all of those things are happening in the arts, in both poetry and music. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's very closely related.
that's interesting. Is it hard sometimes for kids to get wrap their brain around the concepts you teach?
Not when I found no.
Good.
I found if it's presented in a way, one of a technique I use often when I was visiting kindergarten classrooms or K-12, but it works everywhere, is I'll say, okay, just listen to this, and I'll go, and they're all going, wow, that's like a drum beat, that's like whatever.
Yeah.
But that's the opening to this book, Untended Garden. So I just did in the meter, as what you said, I went da 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 da, which is iambic, da 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 da. Only it's tetrameter because it's 4 instead of 5. Da 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 da. This neighborhood is filled with birds. This neighborhood is filled with birds, and then so the ear goes, oh, I got it, yeah.
Yes.
The plaintive call of a mourning dove and the distant response from a wire unseen. 2 crows on grass that Bob Mancock has one. Of course, I don't read it that way, but if I do it, da, 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 you hear
yes,
stressed, unstressed, and then you realize, oh, that's music. That's music.
It is. And I think that's how I process things, definitely with musical ear.
Yeah.
Now, tell me more about what you're doing now. Obviously, you're at home.
I've been watching. Yeah, I still write every day, as I always have for most of my life. I always have. Although I'm not completing a poem a day, I've been working on this book manuscript. So part of that missed opportunity I was talking about was to present the poems raw. I wanted to present them raw as they came that day. And several of them I edited for similitude. And while we were waiting for me to write, as soon as I said I'm going to write about the process, it was like watching a tidal wave approaching from a distance, because I realized to write about every poem would take another 365 days if I were to write one a day.
Right.
And that was an exhausting thought. And so I didn't write about every poem, but I did write about the seed, the process, and I wanted it to be a teaching opportunity for all levels. So I wanted to write it in a way. I told my publisher about it, Pelicanesis, Mark Gibbons, about what I wanted to do, and he was so on board. He went, well, take your time. You tell me how long it's going to take. And then when it kind of took the pressure off.
Good.
And so he said, you got another book in the queue? And I went, yeah. And so we did the other 2, the difference between and similitude. And so this has been, I did that 365 days between 2017 and 2018, April to, to the following end of May, March. And then the Poet Laureateship took my energies. And then right afterwards, I went back to the manuscript, and now this self-isolation. And then life happens in between, as you know, and you have to get the funk out. And then you got to figure out ways to cope with all that's thrown at you. I had my father died, and
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, well, it's but and in a time when all these things are going on, it just really is a lesson of community and where you do have those connections and where you can find them. Like we're finding it right here.
Right.
Not as good as a hug. It's not as good as in person sharing a cuppa or whatever, but breaking bread together, we do, we find our ways. And so it's growth. It's just a new way of figuring out how to cope in a crazy world. But that's life. Life has changed.
Right.
So my point is that it turned into well, now I can settle into things. Now I have time with my wife. Now I have time with my, my dogs, and I can turn to those other projects. And so it's just a reshuffling.
Yes. Well, and I think it's a tuning in and focusing on the things that we perhaps didn't spend enough time with in the first place.
Yeah.
It's a reality slap. It's like, these things have been here all along, and we were running, I feel, at such a fast speed, and deadlines and this and that. And I think things were getting neglected, including the dog,
That's it. If I put down what's important and they don't make the top priorities, well, it's like your book, and it's like crisis management. It shakes you up, but it's an opportunity to reassess and to reprioritize and become a better person. I mean, that was the point of that poem that we talked about on the night we met about the crack in the pot becoming the strongest spot. It's like things that are broken, when they heal, can be that. It can be the thing that is most valued, the place of the healing and the growth.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things I was noticing about your writing is there are probably misconceptions about poetry. Like, I used to think, oh, every other line has to rhyme. And like, how did you learn the style of just creating things that don't necessarily rhyme, but they make sense if you're saying them out loud as you're writing them? I don't know if that's your process as you're writing, to do the beats, to hear how it flows. But how did you learn to really extend yourself and grow as a poet?
By the doing, by the work, the hard work. Your ear gets tuned in to different things, and you start noticing things. If you hang out with a photographer for a year, day to day, and that photographer starts talking to you about what that photographer is seeing and the light coming off of, you start noticing things that your eye hadn't been trained to before.
That's true. And
at the end of the year, you'll be seeing more like a photographer by learning to do. So for me, it was, I didn't study poetry until later in life. I wrote what I thought was poetry, but it was really song lyrics. I mean, every record album I had, I'm dating myself, I had stuffed with notebook pages where I wrote down every lyric, every ooh and ah and beat and breath. And I just was just the words. I was just, into that, hearing that. And so when I started writing myself, it was in the form of a song lyric. It was very metrical. It was very rhymey. Mm-hmm. And I did that for a decade and I called it poetry. And then I didn't realize until I really started studying poetry that wasn't what poetry was being defined as.
Yes.
Of course, poetry shifts, it's like language. English isn't a living language, and the definition of words are determined through usage. So what a word means is what it means when people use it. And so there is no one set definition inherent in that word. They have the roots of the word still hold, the etymology hold that, and so I came into the process of writing poems already with my rhyme and rhythm like really ingrained. And then I remember in 72, again, I'm dating myself, that was the first time a poem came without rhyme that was in a voice that still had music, still had meter, but it was disguised. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh, that's different. That's really a new maturity in my voice. And so and that's been something that I've kept ever since, is that my poems have a lot of craft and internal rhymes and rhythms, and that I try and disguise so that so if somebody reads it, they won't necessarily see that happening, but there'll be enough callbacks to sonics, like assonance, the repeated vowel sounds, which is close to rhyme, the a in this word and then the a in a word.
Yes.
Or an O and an O later. It is a little bit of music. It's a little ear candy. And if you string those together and you do that just daily, your practice, then it's like composing.
Yes.
Composing music. And so
it's a whole language.
It is. It is. It is an artistic language. And then I find the same is true in music and in painting. You know, you're finding that balance in the colors and the callbacks and the complementary things that are happening. I think all the arts are related. I think they all come from the same source.
I think
Personally.
so too. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like people to know about you?
I don't know. Through the arts, I would encourage people to practice the arts if you've never tried it, because it makes you more in love with the world. Yeah. It makes you more aware of the world. It makes you more fully experience all that's around you. And then read. If you want to be a good writer, read a lot, because then it broadens your perspective. It shows you how other people think and live. And you answer questions on the page that you don't even know you're asking, or at least you're understanding it better. If you're not getting the answer, you're at least understanding those things you might not understand, or people, characters. And that has to broaden your worldview.
Right.
When you hear other people's stories, or you try writing in other ways than just your own. And then that builds understanding, and that builds empathy. And so, so what I would want people to know is that the arts are a wonderful thing that everybody should try, I think. Especially
now. I mean, now's the time to really figure out what kind of creative outlet, writing, music, whatever, painting, anything, to submerge yourself in.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Where can people find out more about you?
I have a website. It's myname.com, GRANTHIER, or I also have Hier, my initials, GHIER.com. And then my publications are there. My different projects are all there. I have to update it. That's another thing on my to-do list.
When you have time.
When I have time.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing the show. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are you teaching online right now?
Yeah, halfway through last semester, I teach college. I teach creative writing and critical reasoning in different courses, literature courses. And so halfway through the semester, we went to online, and all of the liberal arts now are going to be online. I'm teaching online, okay. Almost all the liberal arts. So yeah, I'll continue with that.
Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. So if people want to reach out and find out about taking one of your classes, they would just find your information on your website?
Yeah. Come to my website, email me. There's a link there at my website, and I welcome, you won't be bugging me. I always like talking about art and literature. Yeah, I forgot to mention, I'm also, during this isolation, recording a couple different podcasts. One is on the creative process. I'm doing it with Luis Perez of the band Los Lobos. And
cool.
We're texting each other late at night anyway, lines of poetry, and that's our creative time. That's when, and so we both do multiple genres in our art, and so we talk about life and the creative process and things we find interesting, and we hope others will, for the masses in this,
right.
Some distraction, diversion. And so we're in the process. We're recording them now, and we'll put seasons together and release them soon, I hope.
You know what I wanted to ask you too?
Yeah.
Is what do you do when I don't know if this happens to you, perhaps, when you feel burnt out, when you feel stuck, when you go to the paper and nothing seems like it's really coming out right? Do you step away and go do something else? And what would that be?
Yes, sometimes. I tend to stick with it. I find there's so many different ways to approach, to find your way in. That, in fact, that's what I write about in my book. The index are different ways to get into to the writing, to start the process. From the tabula rasa, blank your mind and just see what happens. But when nothing comes, then what? Right. So little exercises like pick a line that you like, that you admire, either from a poem or a novel or any piece of writing, and then look at it and try either, and then imitate it in some way, either the beats like we talked about, or the vowel sounds, or the number of words, or come up with opposites, right? You know, if it says the day was growing, you could go the night was shrinking, and it just gets, it's like a push start, and pop the clutch, and you go. And then you just and then you have to learn. Part of that training is to let the writing become what it wants to be, and not force it too much. So yes, you're in control, and you have to control it and make it a good read and make it understandable, or at least whatever it is your goals are for writing. But I find that the more you listen, the more you let it come naturally, organically, and follow it, the more it seems like it has a life of its own. And it starts, like, I don't know where a poem is going. Almost all of my poems, it'll start with a seed, a word I hear, or a line that I like, or an event that makes me wonder, or a question. And as soon as I start writing, I just follow it. And it's almost like I'm surrendering it, surrendering myself to just follow whatever. I mean, it's my thoughts, on one level, but also there's some kind of thing I can't explain that just happens. And so I would say stay at it, and look at the different. There's a million ways to prime the pump, and they're fun. You know, they're growth. Right. And at the end of it, you end up with something that you never would have had you not tried it. And then you flex that, you've grown that little new muscle. It's what, in teaching, what we call scaffolding. This Lev Vygotsky, it was this incredible brain who pioneered. I'll just do a little aside. I'll try and make it brief. He was in the former Soviet Union. He went to college. He studied literature. He wrote his thesis on Hamlet, and right around the time he was about to graduate, they realized he wasn't enrolled. He was just going there, turning in the papers, doing it for the love of it. And then he did set design, and then he was a polymath. He just loved all these things. One of the things he loved was education, and how the mind works, and how the mind learns, and how it's creative. And so he studied the children of coal miners in the remote regions, and how they were taught and learned. And he came up with a phrase called the zones of proximal development. What is that? I use that in teaching. Okay. And it's also now become the norm. It's scaffolding. So imagine your knowledge base, your existing knowledge base coming into this interview. It was a circle or a throw of light. Okay. And then there's things just beyond that you have the capacity to get to on your own. So real learning happens within. But the teacher then points to that, and rather than give you the answer, says, well, if you know this and this and this, and we see this structure, what's there? And so then it's proximal to your knowledge base, but you develop it just outside that on your own, and that's how you grow knowledge. So a good teacher asks the right questions and points, and the student finds it within themselves. So if I say 1 + 1, this is a rudimentary example, but 1 + 1 is 2, and you know that 2 1s are 2. So if you pose the question, if you have 1 3 times, what do you have? So you're learning the multiplication tables by saying it in different ways that turns on a light. And so
I'm a visual person. I'm a very visual learner. So what you did with the brain, and you're like this, and then this comes in, and I'm like, okay, got that.
So so you just grow, and that's what the arts do. I mean, so if you try a type of writing, my point was, if you try a type of writing that's beyond what you've tried before, you then have just grown. And you've experienced more of the world, and isn't that what learning and arts?
Yeah, and so it's so uplifting too.
So uplifting and filling, and you become that much richer for
Yes,
having seen that. So
definitely.
yeah, so I say try, push yourself. Don't take it easy. If it doesn't come, stick with it. The world is full of people who go, oh, I have that great book. I have that book.
I
But
know.
haven't written it,
Yeah,
or guitar players who lost their calluses, who just couldn't find the time to stick with it. And that's where we are. I mean, I'm guilty of it in different
me
ways
too.
too. My
Yeah,
yoga, I know I'm happier when I'm doing yoga daily.
yeah.
Do I do it?
All right, next time we talk, I'll be checking in.
That's a deal.
Okay,
I hope we talk again. That would be great. I
that
would
would
love
be
that.
great. I really enjoyed this.
Me too. It's a pleasure.